If you look at this, the S&P 500, the stock market over the last 100 years, it's up and to the right. If you zoom in, it gets hairy in there. It gets really hairy. You've got a decade where no one made any money. Decade's a long time, but
The grand scheme of things doesn't seem like any time.
yeah, keep zooming out. Like you said, I've never had a trial that I'm not able to look back and see why that happened. I say it on my business podcast. I say test everything except drugs. Just keep testing, keep staying curious. When you quit on the gospel, you have no promise. All bets are off.
And we're excited to have you on here.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, just tell us a little bit about yourself, because we know who you are. I mean, nobody else. Well, I say that. There's a lot of people who know who you are.
Well, I'm Chris Koerner, 37, live in Dallas, Texas area, 4 kids, married for 6 years. Grew up in Utah, Central Florida, served a mission in Budapest, Hungary from 06 to 08. Met my now wife as a 13-year-old in church. We went to seminary together.
Did you really?
Yep.
13, okay.
And we've been married 16 years, and we have an awesome marriage and 4 great kids. And I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've always been starting businesses since I was a kid, and I love it. I feel like I'm retired. It's work, but it doesn't feel like work. And I start businesses for a living, and I make content about it. And what was I going to say? I got my undergrad from Alabama, a business degree, and then I got master's in business administration from TCU in Fort Worth about 5 years ago.
That's awesome.
That's so sick.
Yeah.
So I heard a little bit about this podcast that you're releasing soon. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, we haven't released it yet, but we've recorded 5 episodes. It's my wife and I. It's called How'd You Do It? How'd you do it? And we interview parents of children in the church, particularly parents of children that are grown and out of the house. Maybe their kids left the church. Maybe one did, the rest didn't. Maybe they all stayed faithful. It doesn't matter. We're interviewing parents of kids, parents that never quit the gospel, despite how hard it is to raise kids in the church in this day and age. And we ask them how they did it. What were your tactics? What were your strategies? What were your hardest, lowest moments? What were your brightest moments? How can we do it? What would you suggest? We get specific, like what was your phone policy? What was your friend policy, your dating policy? And it's just interesting because I grew up in kind of an untraditional church household. I come from a long line of members of the church, but my parents kind of fell away. And so I've always been inherently curious from other parents in the church of what their experience looked like. So
Dude, I love that because it fits so perfectly in what we're trying to do here on this podcast as well. And I think today we're going to be able to give our insights along with your insights and other parents' insights that you've talked to about how we feel about some of the parenting styles and how you guys feel about some of the parenting styles. I say you guys as in you and the people you've talked to, right? I think it's going to be pretty interesting. So there's a few questions we just kind of want to ask you, like simply from first, let's just start with your family. Like, as you've seen your kids grow older, how have you been able to keep not a tight hold on them, but how have you been able to keep them steady in the gospel, but also give them enough agency to make their own choices?
Man, this is a topic that I've been thinking a lot about lately. You know, your parenting style often changes as your kids get older. You make plans and you're like, all right, we're going to do this, we're not going to do that. And then you learn, man, these guys have agency. These guys, this is not as predictable as I thought. And every kid is so different. You can't raise your kids the same way. I've got kids that are sensitive. I've got kids that are stubborn, kids that are prideful, kids that are humble, kids that are class clowns, kids that are serious and brooding all the time. It's just, you don't know what you're going to get. And so now I just have this theory and it's playing out in real time. And I don't know if it'll work or not, but we want our kids to flex into their agency. So, you know, it's, when my wife and I were younger, it was, you know, let's not get them phones until they're 18. And we know it'll be hard. We know it won't be practical, but you know, phones are toxic and yeah, they're a tool, but it's just so dangerous. And then we got older and it's like, okay, the kid gets a phone at 18. It's kind of like handing a gun to someone that doesn't know how to use a gun. And then at that same time, you're saying, okay, bye. Good luck. The worst thing you could do.
I want to hit on that real quick. It's exactly what you're saying. Like anything that you start with and have no clue how to do it, it just takes time to build up upon. Like there are some serious dangers with phones, you know, like some serious dangers. But at the same time, when you leave the house and you don't experience those dangers before, I mean, how are you going to do it by yourself? Because you don't have parents at that point. You're making your own decisions, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we, now our kids, they get like an Apple Watch when they're 12, if they want it. and it's not really connected to anything but messages. And then at 14, they get a phone. And then probably around 16 or 17, they'll get Instagram, maybe 16. And then maybe 17, when they're still in the house, that last year with us, they're going to be able to do just about whatever they want, honestly, with just very few exceptions. And it's like, okay, like in a matter of months, you're going to be on your own. So why don't you kind of practice being on your own while you're still kind of not? That's the plan. And it could change. My oldest is 14 right now. So it sounds great on paper. It might not work out in real life, but we just feel strongly that it can't just be all or nothing agency. By the time they're 18, they need to have acted like an adult for a while. And once again, there are probably people listening to this that already have adults that are just laughing, and that's fine. This is just my theory at this point.
Well, I love how you're giving them the opportunity to have your guidance in the house, but still have the opportunity to be like running their own lives at that point, you know? Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, having the guardrails, it's almost like learning with bowling with bumpers on.
Yeah.
Because once you learn and those bumpers come down, like you don't need them anymore. You're going to be able to hit that lane every time.
Yeah. It's, as a parent, it's tempting to just shield your kid from the world. There's bad stuff out there, but they've got to be resilient. And every parent wants their kids to be resilient. We all talk about it, but that only happens if you expose them to the world a little bit. Right? You don't get calluses on your hands unless you lift weights, tear muscles. But your hands aren't tough unless you get calluses. So
real quick, like what inspired you to do your podcast? Like I just am wondering what you're thinking. Like how did you, because you have a bunch of entrepreneurships you're dealing with, like how are you able to balance that, and what made you want to do that?
I've had an idea for this podcast and another podcast for about 8 years. I wanted to do another church podcast that interviewed people that left the church and then came back. And I wanted to ask them, why? Why did you leave and why did you come back? Right? And that was one idea that I've had for 8 years. And this was the other idea. And about a year ago, I heard about a podcast called the Comeback Podcast. And that's exactly what it is. And it's this woman, Ashley, and she was, and I'm saying, everything I'm saying, she's very open about. She was a drug addict for her whole life. And in the church, left the church, came back, gave up on drugs, and very active, very devout. And she interviews people that left the church and came back. And it's very good. And she does a very good job at it. So when I saw this podcast and saw how many people it was helping and how popular it was, I thought, I should do mine. I should do mine. And then I used to work in the Dallas Temple the first 6 years on Friday mornings. And I distinctly remember I was walking through the temple one day, and my daughter has struggled with health issues at times, right? And I got the impression as I was walking, her name's Avery, it was, your daughter has been, I'm saying it as if I was hearing these clear words, and I wasn't. This was just the general message of what I got. Like, your daughter has been blessed because of A, your service in the temple, like her health has been blessed, and B, because of your desire to start this podcast. Wow. Because it's going to do a lot of good. And now I had that impression 6 years ago, and I sat on it for 6 years. I haven't started it yet. And so it's like, I feel compelled to do it, because 6 years in the Lord's time is relatively nothing, right? So as far as the Lord's concerned, I need to start this. And another big reason I'm starting this is because we had our third child and we were on the fence about having a fourth. And my youngest, my fourth, is 8.5 right now. And I was driving home from work and I was listening to a church podcast that's no longer around. That was similar to my concept, a little different. And a couple was talking about how they had a child and they felt impressed to name their child after one of their ancestors because he was going to need to rely on that later in life. And as soon as I heard that, I had the distinct impression. I remember where I was on the road. I was right on the expressway exiting onto Bethany. And I had the distinct impression, you need to have a fourth child. You need to name him after your ancestor. And it's going to be a boy. And I called my wife right away and I told her. And she's like, okay. So we had a fourth child and it was a boy. And I named him after my ancestor. And it's because of something that I heard on a podcast. Wow. And there's another reason I'm starting it is because I was on my mission. And there was a senior couple that I became close with, the Stubbs, different Stubbs. And
it's like, I know those Stubbs.
Yeah. And they had 5 or 6 kids and they had a deal in their house. And the deal was if their kid read the Book of Mormon in its entirety before they got baptized, they would get to go on a trip with mom or dad anywhere in the country. And all 6 of their kids did it. They all read the Book of Mormon before they were 8. And I never forgot that. I thought, that's cool. I'm gonna do that.
Well, as simple as it sounds, that's a life changer. Like
Yeah.
reading the Book of Mormon once, no matter how simple you read it, if you don't like dive into it at all, it will change your life.
Yeah. So I heard that it was a one-off conversation. Elder Stubbs probably forgot that he even said it to me. I never forgot it. I had 4 kids. The youngest is 8.5. All 4 of them did it. They all went on a trip. And I'm sure, I don't know yet, I'm sure it changed their life to an extent, all because of a one-off conversation about a tactic that family employed to help their kids. And so what if there was a podcast where people all over the world could hear those tactics? Like, how far-reaching could the effect of that be? So that's like my 5th reason for wanting to start it.
That's amazing.
That's so cool.
Thank you.
So let's say, for example, there's a teenager who's in the process of falling away from the church, right? They're not fully there, but you can tell they're slipping away. Like, what's the best piece of advice you would give those parents? You could sit them down and be like, hey, before it's too late. Or would you even say anything?
Well, that's an interesting question because my oldest is 14. So none of my kids have left the church yet.
Mm-hmm.
Statistically speaking, one of them is likely to, at least one of them, just looking at raw numbers of activity rates in the church. All 3 of my siblings have stepped away from the church, temporarily, in my opinion, although it's been years. So although I haven't experienced that as a parent, I've experienced that as a sibling. And the gut reaction for any parent, I believe, is to push back and to say, this is not what you do. This is what you do. Here's why you're wrong. Here's what you're supposed to do. As long as you're doing this, you don't have my full blessing, my full approval. And I see the justification in that. But they've done studies with people with addiction or people that are struggling with behavioral issues. And society oftentimes takes that person and puts them in solitary confinement or in jail or segregates them from the herd, from the community. Time out, so to speak. And studies have shown like that is the worst thing you could do to a person that's struggling is put them on an island. That's when they need others the most, right? Now, in cases of addiction, they might not want to be around others because that could be their triggers for relapsing on the addiction. But when it comes to children, I think when a child starts to fall away, that's when you bring them in closer than ever, draw them in closer than ever before, love them more than ever before. Because if you don't have a base foundation layer of love with your child, then they don't have anything to come back to.
I don't think people understand how profound an impact just being kind to people in school or at church or like very simple things too. Nothing like dramatic, just saying a kind word or giving them a smile or even like just looking at them. Like it literally will change lives. There's been so many times where later, like down the road, I just talked to somebody. I felt like, hey, I should go talk to this person. And later it came back and they just said, hey, like you changed my life that day. Like I was going down a really rough road and you gave me the courage I needed to come back.
Yeah, I mean, you hear countless stories of all these people who are like, I remember having the missionaries over when I was a kid. And, they go 30 years without hearing anything about it. But then that one impression where they're like, oh, my childhood best friend was a member of the church. And they have all these stories and they have such a good image of the church. And so there's people too where if you're in the church at some point, you know the goodness of it. And so if you fall away, pulling them back in or supporting them in that way, I feel like it won't make them, disregard it or like fully hate the church, if that makes sense, because you'll have that good feeling.
Yeah.
You'll have those good memories.
It's hard to play the long game when you don't see the fruit of the seeds that you plant, right? Like I went to Eastern Europe for 2 years and all we did was tract. That's it. We spoke to people on the street and we knocked doors. That's it. We had very few referrals. And I planted thousands of seeds. I got rejected tens of thousands of times. And I don't know what happened. I don't know. I know that I baptized like 11 people in 2 years. I know that many of them, maybe half of them have, fallen away. But one day I'll know. I'll be able to see the great book of life, how many of those seeds became germinated, turned into trees, which bore other fruit, and their kids went on missions and all that. But we sell ourselves short just because of the nature of we're not able to see that. We can't see the end from the beginning yet. And so when we say a kind word to someone, 99% chance we'll never get feedback on what that kind word was. You got feedback, and that's rare, but how many times have we said something kind to someone or we've loved someone and we never got feedback? How many times has someone loved us or said something to us and we didn't provide feedback, right? So we need to remember that we're planting seeds. Like it's literally like we're walking around the country and we're spreading seeds everywhere and then we're never coming back there. but behind us, there's a beautiful forest, right? So we just have to play the long game.
I think it's interesting that so many people forget that our job is not to convert people, but it's just to plant those seeds. Like God is going to do the converting, right? We're not trying to convert them. The Holy Ghost is going to convert them as long as we plant the seed. And me and Drew were talking about this yesterday. And that's really just like sharing the gospel with everybody. And the ones that are ready, God is going to convert them. And the ones that aren't, they just aren't ready.
Yeah.
But you still, they still need to hear it.
And we need to share it whether they accept it or not.
That's right.
That's why we're here. That's why we got these mics in front of us.
That's right.
It's true. So kind of a question I have for you is, how can parents create open conversations with their kids about faith without creating like tension and just like having an openness? Because I know even in my family, like there's certain times where my parents will come talk to me about different things that I don't really want to talk about it. You know, so what have you seen that are like different ways to kind of help your kids or other parents' kids that you've talked to just kind of open up and have an honest conversation about where they're at or where they want to go?
And if you would have asked me this a week ago, I'd probably come up short. But I try to be intentional in my parenting. I try to have a strategy, right? When I tell my daughter she's beautiful, I believe that, but also I'm thinking long term. I want her to know that she's beautiful inside and out, right? I try to have conversations with my kids about the gospel. Like sometimes I'll pull them in my office and say, you know, tell me about your testimony. What'd you learn about in church today? And I get nothing. Like, I'd love to tell you this beautiful story. We shed tears together, and they bear their testimony, me and I, to them. I get nothing from them. Like 4 out of 4, nothing. I'm trying, I'm intentional, but
Hey, we've all been there.
yeah,
We've all been there.
yeah. But sometimes the intentionality, it doesn't work because it's almost because it's intentional. Like it's scripted, you know, like my intent is good. I'm thinking eternally, long term. I'm looking for their benefit, but it's almost like they feel like they're part of a plan and it's not organic. And so what has worked, which happens less frequently than I'd like, is, you know, last week we drove to Alabama as a family and we were driving back and it was Sunday. And so we try to only listen to Sunday type stuff. And so we were listening to some church podcasts and it brought up some good conversations, and I would pause it. And we talked about, you know, some people that are critical of the church and why, and how critics of the church say this, but the defense against that is this, and how you have to be resilient because there's a lot of stuff on the internet. You got to know how to deal with it. And they were engaging. And we were just having this back and forth with like all 4 of my kids. And I was just driving just like in heaven. I'm like, I can't believe this is happening. Like, am I in a church video right now? And this, like, I can count on one hand how many times we've had conversations like this in my life. So it's not common, but it was just organic and it was natural and it was on a Sunday and it just happened. And you just went with it, and it's like, don't get too excited. Don't get too excited. But I think that's, you just have to, it's kind of like a baseball analogy. You never hit a home run if you stay in the dugout, right? But at least if you go up to bat, you're putting yourself in a situation to win. Every now and then they'll pitch it just right and you'll hit it out of the park. But you just got to go up to bat 1,000 times, and maybe a couple of the times you'll hit it.
It's so interesting that you talk about those organic conversations. I'm sure Drew has a bunch of insight on this as well. But at least for me, the times that I can open up the best with my parents are when it's those organic experiences, not the times that it's like, come into my office and talk to me. Like you already know, like you're going in to share, it just doesn't ever feel right. But the times where you're just spending quality bonding time with your dad or your mom or like your brothers or anybody, that's when I feel like you can really open up and just have an honest conversation, because it doesn't feel like they're pushing something on you. You can just open up and share.
Yeah. I'm thinking of like a Venn diagram. I really like Venn diagrams in my head, and what has to overlap. And it's like your child has to be in a good mood. That's one of the circles. That's a non-negotiable. And then the other circle is like something going on has to be like gospel related. And then right there in the overlap is where you'll get them. Because I'll be driving my son to seminary and he's in a good mood and we're talking about football or whatever. And that's a perfect opportunity to have just a pure conversation about life, right? The church aspect just isn't quite there. But then sometimes he's in a really good mood and something about church comes up and I've got the little overlap and I've got an in. And then we can talk about a testimony or something they might be struggling with.
And just from a kid's point of view, those little ins mean a lot more than parents think they do, I think. Like the times that my dad has had those ins with me or my mom has had those ins with me, they're very profound experiences. It's never just like those little times that it seems like. Later down the road, it's like for days you're just thinking about that one conversation.
Really?
But it's hard to get to that.
That's gratifying to hear, because I don't remember ever having those as a kid. So as a parent, like, it's amazing for me, but I'm just thinking, like, do they like it? Is it good for them? You know?
Well, I think of it like this. I always use the analogy. So my middle name's Thomas after Tom Brady. We're huge Patriots
Okay,
fans.
okay.
And so my dad always says, I'm Bill Belichick, you're Tom Brady. You're the player, you're the QB, you're the field general. You can see things on the field that maybe I can't see from the sideline, right? You can see the formation. You can see, oh, there's a linebacker that's putting a spy on you so you can't scramble, right? So there's things that I can see. And so I might have to call an audible in the moment. But there's things on the sideline that he can see too, right? He's calling the plays. And I have to be susceptible to listen to those because he's the football genius, right? He's been through it. And so being able to have that kind of connection. But if Tom has a big loss and he's going to be down on himself, I don't think it's going to be the most effective for Bill the very next day after that loss to come in early morning of practice and be like, this is what you did wrong, this is what you did wrong. Because I feel sometimes there's been those times where like, hey, we need to talk about this and this and this. And if you're down on yourself, or you're not in one of those moods where you're up, you're happy, you're feeling good, and it just, all it does is just break you down even more and you get in your head. So that's why I really like that analogy, is because it helps you think when it's a good win, right? Those are the times where like, hey, you did this, and this really well, but like, let's work on these two things. Because you're in such a good thing, you're open to suggestions, you're open to having these dialogues where you're able to build on that success because you're in that mood, you're in that winning mentality.
So you're saying if you're down on yourself already, it's not helpful for your dad or for Bill Belichick to be down on you.
Yeah.
No, I got to jump in on that too. Like, getting hammered by anybody while you're already like hammering yourself, like, you're not going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to, the positive reinforcement, especially from your parents, is huge.
What if you're being prideful or stubborn and you're not down on yourself and your mom or dad think that you should be? Why aren't you feeling bad? Why aren't you remorseful? Like, you did a bad thing and you're just like, does that ever happen?
I think, yeah, for sure it does. And I think those are the times we do need that parenting where you come in hard and you say like,
You're wrong.
you're wrong. Because we do need that sometimes. But then it's just finding that balance, because there's other times where we most definitely know we're wrong and we beat ourselves up more than anybody else does.
I feel like what's worked for me is this took a long time to find this. You know, there's a lot of clashing, a lot of things that I wish I could take back, but we're at a really good place right now, me and my parents, where if we're disconnected, like, one of us it doesn't have to be the same person every time, but somebody will say, I can tell there's a disconnect. Let's just take a break. And we'll sleep on it. We'll do something. Because if one person's in a good mood, like, sometimes my dad will come in, he'll be like, dude, I'm so hyped. You're doing this really well. Like, I love the path you're on. While we're up, let's do this one thing. But I've had a really stressful day and I want to talk about it. And I am in that good mentality, but like, in that moment, or I might get really defensive because everything that he's praising me for, I'm like, yeah, thank you. And then that one thing strikes a chord and it all just goes downhill. And I close up and I throw out my walls and my defenses are high. And then all of a sudden you can't get anywhere, because all I'm going to do is anything that he says, even if it's constructive or even if it's supportive, I'm defending and I'm throwing away. So my responsibility is I have to notice that and be like, hey, I'm not a good headspace. I got to sleep on this. Or we got to take a break. And it's like nothing rude. It's just, honestly, I can't talk to you when I'm in this mentality. Or sometimes he'll be the same way. Is he'll come on and he'll get like super passionate about it. Or he'll be like, we got to talk about this. And he gets over it. And then I'll be susceptible to I'll be like, I'd love to hear it. And then I just start feeling like, whoa, what's happening? And then the same thing where then he's like, you're right. We got to step back. So it's that open communication of, somebody's got to take accountability, even if you see it or in yourself or the other person, but somebody's got to step back. Yeah. I feel like that has really, really helped and changed our relationship.
Man, that Venn diagram analogy you said, now that I think about it, is like, you couldn't be more right on that, because it's exactly what Drew's saying. You can't, like, there's so many times where one person's in a good mood or the other person's in a good mood, but that little space, it has so much more impact when you do hit it.
It's beautiful when you find it, but
it sure takes a lot to get there.
It's hard to get there.
And the third circle is probably me, right?
Yeah.
I've got to be in a good mood. Sometimes I'm driving him to seminary and I'm stressed out about work. And he's talking about Alabama football and my head is somewhere else. And I'm thinking about this lawsuit or whatever. His Venn diagram's looking great, but I'm not aligned, right? So.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the good things that happen, like with coming to Christ and all the good times we can have talking with our parents. I want to go to the bad times for a little bit so we can understand how to like make them better. What are some things that you've seen while talking to other parents and in your own kids' lives that it just seems like they're going through this humongous struggle? I don't know how to help them.
Oh man. I mean, I've had a situation recently with one of my kids where it just seems like they're just not on the same page, and they know that they're doing something wrong and I know that they're doing something wrong, and I'm just watching it play out and there's nothing I can do. And I'm an idea guy. Like that's my job, is thinking of ideas, right? Maybe a business idea, maybe a marketing idea within a business, maybe taking this unique idea for this industry and putting it together and trying something new. And never in recent history have I ever been at a loss for an idea, right? Maybe I'm solving a business problem or family problem, whatever. There's always a creative way to solve any problem. But here recently, when it comes to parenting, I've just like leaned against the wall and just thought like, I have no idea what to do right now. And then I even thought, I just zoomed out a little bit and I'm like, I don't know when the last time it was that I thought that. I always know what to do, you know? Like it might be a hard decision, but I always have the idea. I always see the path. But right here, it's like, I genuinely have no idea how else to approach this situation. Like I got to keep praying. I got to keep thinking, waiting, pondering. But like I haven't experienced that as an adult other than as a parent. And you just throw spaghetti at the wall. You just try things, you know. One of my kids, I took the door off the hinges of their room. And it's like, and it's funny because I was at a friend's house a few years ago, and I noticed that one of the doors was off his hinges, and I'm like, what's going on there? He's like, don't ask. It's my kid. Don't ask. And I remember thinking like, that's kind of weird. Oh, what's this guy? This guy a psychopath? And now that I'm a parent, it's like, oh, that's why. Okay, yeah. And so now here I am in the same shoes, judging before, and now I'm the guy. So it's just like, will it work? I don't know. I have no idea. I'm trying it. So.
It's all about the idea of buying in, right? I think there's two types of kids, I feel like, these days. You have the kind where you get told something, you don't believe it, or you don't want to do it. One of the two. Mm-hmm. And there's either A, you pretend to do it, and to make them get them off your back, right?
So true.
And then you're still doing it, or maybe you are just doing it, but you're not bought in. So obviously you're not doing it with effort. And then the parent obviously can tell you can't see the spark in their eyes, or you can still catch them. But so you either have the faker, or you just have the one that just says, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And it's all like, yes, all smiles, and then just never does it. Because that's the kind of person that I was when I was younger, is I would get told something. Like I had a really big problem with, this is going to sound funny, I was addicted to candy. I still love candy, but I had a sweet tooth when I was a kid. Like I had a big drawer. It looked like it was Halloween every night. And I would eat it just constantly. And they'd be like, if you have any candy tonight, if I see any wrappers in this bin, I'm like 9. And they're like, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. You're going to walk to school, all these things. I live in Washington, so it was super hilly. It was terrible. And that night I would be like, yes, I will never eat a piece of candy again. And then that night they would come in with a flashlight at like 10:30, and I would be up reading a book in my bed, eating candy. That's the kind of kid I was. And as I've gone older, it's gotten to older things, but it was the same thing where then I've had to really reflect and be like, I'm saying the right things, but I'm not actually doing it. So how can I personally buy in? And so that's where I've had to experience it with the gospel even, is I would be like, yeah, I'm reading my scriptures, I'm praying. And there would be like 6 months where I prayed only when it was during meals, when I was asked to. I didn't read the scriptures. I didn't pray. I would only go to seminary because my sister drove me. All those things. And then when you get older and it's life getting real, like I'm going to college in 6 months. Is that going to be my life? Am I going to be that same kid where, yeah, my mom's texting me, hey, do you go to church? And I'm on church in a month because I'm living alone. Mm-hmm. So it's that personal buy-in. It's like throwing a spaghetti at walls. I don't exactly know how a parent can get them to buy in besides just blindly shooting and hoping that something hits. But I have a few experiences where I can really think of, I'll have to think of, maybe I can share one later, where you have just like that thing, it just hits you. It just strikes a chord. Mm-hmm. And then from then on, I'm all in. I'm either here or I'm here. But the faking thing I can't do. I'll say it, but I won't ever do it.
I think it connects so greatly to the brother of Jared's story, and we're kind of learning this right now in Come Follow Me. But it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. Jesus comes to the brother and Jared and says, you've got to go figure out the light. Like, I will help you, but you're coming to me now. You're going to come to me with a plan, and I'm going to help you with the rest. And I think that works for both ends, for kids and for parents. Because sometimes for us, like, we don't know what to do either. Like, we're stuck in a hole and we don't know how to get out of it. And it's like a two-way street where neither side knows how to get out. But it just takes one of the sides saying, I'm going to go ask Heavenly Father. I'm going to come up with a plan, and I'm going to say, Heavenly Father, this is what I want to try. And that's when Heavenly Father will come in and help.
Yeah, I'm thinking like it's ironic because you have this podcast, I have my podcast, and I used to stress, it's like, okay, well, if I take the door off the hinges, like, is that going to mess up my kid for life? Like, is that, I've got this podcast where we talk about tactics for raising kids so people can, I'm going to read the Book of Mormon before I'm 8. And we talk a lot. We're talking a lot about, how to raise kids in the gospel, how to raise ourselves in the gospel. But if we zoom out even more, like, there's only one thing that matters. And that's that, like, we don't quit the gospel. That's it. Like, I had the thought recently, someone was asking me, and they're like, I just don't know. Am I a good parent? Like, I worry a lot. Like, am I good? Am I doing this right? And I had the thought, it's like, and you could take the same framework and apply it to anything. If you're frequently wondering, am I doing this right? Am I a good parent? You're a good parent. Like, the fact that you're asking yourself that question,
it means
you're a good parent.
Absolutely.
Because people that are not good parents, and they exist, they're not asking themselves that. They're not wondering. It's not on their radar. You know what I'm saying? But the act of caring means that you're going to follow through with some level of action. Is it enough to keep your kid in the church or to keep your kid off drugs? I don't know. Your kid has agency. You can make keeping them away from drugs a full-time job, and they still have their agency, right? So if we stay invested, we never throw in the towel, ever. Like, we never say, this is too hard, I'm checking out, I'm done. It will work out. Our kids might all leave the church. All 4 of them, they could all leave the church. In the long run, it'll work out. It'll all be fine. Like, we'll all be okay. But when you quit on the gospel, you have no promise. All bets are off.
I hate that we always tell ourselves that trials are the worst thing that happened to us, and all of these different hardships we're having they're so hard. And it's true, they are hard. But if I look back on all the trials that I've had in my life, and there's been some really hard ones, they're all there for a reason. Like, literally all of them. You might not see it in the moment. You might not see it for 10 years after, but they're there for a reason.
Absolutely.
It's like the Lord says the strong winds are pushing you to the promised land. He's literally shaping us. And it's what you're saying. If we can endure and stay past the trials, we're gonna drop.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can slowly climb out of them, that's when we get so much higher. I feel like, honestly, like, I'm at a spot, I don't know about you, Drew, but like, we're starting to climb up right now. We're starting this podcast. We've had different trials, but we're like on this upward climb, and we're going to fall back down. But you literally just turn the climb again and you get back up, and you can't stop thinking like that. Because if you think like, oh, I'm on the top, I'm not going back down, that's just false. You're always going back down. Yep. But you can come back up too.
I remember thinking that when I got home from my mission, I was 21. It's like, wow, okay, I've made it. I'm good. And I literally pictured this in my mind. It's just like a trajectory towards heaven now. And then, 17 years later, it's like, no, it's always going to be like that. The point is that, it's like if you look at the S&P 500, the stock market over the last 100 years, it's up and to the right. If you zoom in, it gets hairy in there. It gets really hairy. You've got a decade where no one made any money. Decade's a long time, but
the grand scheme of things doesn't seem like any time.
Yeah. Keep zooming out. Like you said, I've never had a trial that I'm not able to look back and see why that happened. Right. And like, I'm only 30. I think that's pretty surprising. I would think a lot of trials that I've yet to experience, I won't see the good of until the next life. But even though I'm not even halfway dead yet. Even still, I can look at every single trial and say, that's why that happened. And that's a luxury. Most people can't say that. I'm sure I'll have some really hairy trials in the future. My patriarchal blessing talks about it, that I will go to my deathbed saying, I don't know why that happened. That was really hard, and I still haven't learned my lesson from it. But then I'll get to the other side, and I'm confident. It'll be like, oh, okay, now I see it.
The trials that we face are so hard, but honestly, I'm grateful for all of them. It's like what we were just talking about. In the moment, you cannot see past it. I think that's why President Nelson always hits us with thinking celestial, because it's not something that you can always think about. When you're in a rough spot, you're never thinking celestial. You're not in the right mindset to think with a broader perspective. That's why he keeps telling us at every conference, every time he speaks, is think celestial, because it's what you're saying. The bigger you can see the picture, you understand like it's just going to be this up and down.
Yeah, and I even, when I'm going through a trial, I even think in the moment. It's like, all right, Chris, you know this is going to be good. Like I'll remember right then. And still.
Doesn't
it's just
matter.
nothing.
Well, that happens to me all the time. Even looking back, I love looking back where it's like, okay, I'm watching film. I knew that this happened, and this is why it happened. And like, I'm so grateful. Like I always say the refiner's fire, right? I love that line because if you look at me 6 months ago, like especially in high school, like that's a long time. And if you look at me 2 months ago, I'm way different. And so I'm constantly being refined, and I can look back a lot of the trials and a lot of even the small things and be like, yeah, that sucked in the moment, but it was so small compared to the grand scheme of things. And I'm like, again, I'm only 17. I'm not even an adult yet. And being able to like, see some of these things, and that was difficult. But that made me who I am today, and I couldn't see that for the world.
Yeah, and it's perspective too. You probably look back on trials that you had years ago, and you look at them now, you're like, that was a trial? To me, today, that would be nothing.
That's true.
Like I've got 7 businesses, and when you have 7 businesses, statistically speaking, something's on fire at any given time.
You got a lot of trials.
Like something is blowing up in a bad way at any given time.
Well, I was gonna say, if you have 7 successful businesses, how many businesses have you started and failed?
Well, I've started 75,
There you go.
and most of them have failed.
Yeah.
But I don't have to keep doing that. That's my own dang fault. But I mean, I was just thinking this week I've received a cease and desist from a lawyer about something, and I've sent a cease and desist to a lawyer about something else entirely. And they're like not even on the top of my mind. Like that should, for a lot of people, that would be like the most stressful thing they were dealing with. And I've got 2 at the same time. And it's just like one more email in my inbox because it's relative, like it's like your capacity for trials or stress. The more you experience it, the more you desensitize yourself to it, the more it goes up, and like the more you can withstand. And then it really takes some hairy stuff to shake you.
Yeah, I love that. That's true. That's really
75 businesses.
Yep.
Wow.
And I use the word lightly, businesses, but some sort of a test or an experiment or something that generated revenue or that I had an LLC for or something. I have a spreadsheet with all of them.
It's funny. It's the same way in the gospel. You're going to try 1,000 different ways to connect with Christ, and every single person is not going to connect the same way.
I heard this one saying before. It was like called throwing spaghetti at a wall, I think.
That exact thing. You just do it over and over, and one of the spaghetti pieces stick.
Yeah. I say it on my business podcast. I say, test everything except drugs. Just keep testing, keep staying curious.
We really appreciate you coming on this podcast and talking to us about this. I think it's really going to impact a lot of people's lives, especially just the bond with parents and kids and understanding like you can go talk to them. They're just going to love you. They're there to help you. It's hard to, from our perspective, to think like, I'm going through this, I can't go share that with my parents. Like they're going to hate me, but it's just not reality. Like, I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but
oh man,
I know how much parents love their kids.
Yeah. If my kid only knew, like if they were to come to me with something they're struggling with, I'd be like a kid on Christmas morning. Right. And that's the one moment they think I'm going to freak out. I would just be so giddy. Like, wow, you trusted me enough to divulge this to me. Like I would go out of my way, bend over backwards to make sure that they didn't feel judged or shamed, just because it's such a hard thing to humble yourself, to go to an adult, someone that has the power to put you in timeout forever, to take your screen time away forever. It takes a lot. So
that's the biggest thing, where honestly, probably the thing I'm the most grateful for right now, especially like as we've been thinking about this topic, I was like, dang, the amount of times, I mean, thousands of times where I screwed up and my dad easily could have been like, okay, no more going out, no more phone, like all these things. I broke the same rule like hundreds of times at one point. And I just kept doing it over and over and over because I would say, yeah, okay, like this is the last time. And I would do it again. I can see looking back now how many times I hurt him. But every single time he would just give me another chance. He'd be like, hey, like I want to empower you. And the amount of like gratitude I have for that empowerment now that I'm on the other side and I'm able to regulate myself. And obviously I'm not perfect, But as I've grown, like that type of parenting style that he had in me, and it sucked at times, but holy cow, am I grateful for him. Without that, I don't know where I'd be right now. I don't know if I'd still be in the church. But that empowerment is finally, he was able to connect, and that spaghetti stuck to the wall, and I was able to buy in. And that I am forever grateful for.
I've got to jump on that. Like, I am so grateful for my parents, and the times that I have been humble enough to come talk to them about my struggles. It's exactly what you're saying. They never judge you. Satan is the one that's telling you that if you go tell them, they're going to judge you or they're going to put some huge consequence on yourself. But it's like a bunch of the topics that apostles talk about. The truth will set you free, and it's serious. Once you tell that to somebody, it's literally like somebody's lifting a house off you. And it's an incredible feeling, especially to be able to connect with your parents.
Yeah, I have a standing question that I ask all of the parents I interview on my show. And it's, as you look back on your parenting, do you regret being too strict or not strict enough? And I've interviewed parents that had all of their kids leave the church, parents that had none of their kids leave the church, and then mostly a mix of the two. And every single parent has answered the same way. They wish they would have been less strict. Every single one. And you'd think maybe the ones whose kids went off the rails, they wish they would have been more strict or vice versa. No.
Sometimes being too strict literally pushes you off the rail.
That's exactly
Me and
right.
Drew were talking about this the other day.
We both have struggled with the same thing where they come in and all you want to do, you get backed into a corner, and what are you going to do? You're just going to sit there and take the punches. And it might not be actually throwing punches at you, but when you're in that corner, you
Feels
feel
like it.
threatened.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you do when you threaten? You turn around.
And when those blocks are put up, it almost makes you want to do them more, to be fully honest with you. Like, you put huge roadblocks up, and it's just, how do I get over them and just do whatever they're telling me not to do?
Yeah, sometimes you're your own worst enemy.
You need the parenting hood too. Like, don't just go like 0. You obviously need it, but I think it's important for a lot of parents to understand that, like, the biggest roadblocks don't always need to be so big.
Mountains out of molehills.
It's true.
It's interesting to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I've enjoyed being able to have both sides and being able to talk openly with having both sides of the parent and you not being my dad, because I don't think I could have this conversation with my dad just because, nothing against my dad. I love my dad. It's just different.
Yeah.
So it's been really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you, man.